I've been a pen and paper tabletop game master for the past 7 to 8 years. My long-term dream is to have a dedicated room for it. A large central table, a big screen for maps and combat, integrated power outlets and USB ports, comfortable chairs with cup holders and LED lighting, and to create just a generally very cozy, cool and epic atmosphere. However, dedicated rooms are expensive and not currently realistic for me. That led me to a different idea. Creating a portable setup that could turn almost any room into a makeshift pen and paper space. Not perfect, but still impressive. The core concept is a transportable table or digital playfield. I already own a screen that I've been using for years, positioned so players can see both me and the display at the same time. So, while brainstorming with a friend, we were at a lake, I sketched a collapsible table, made of 4 segments with colored corners, allowing the screen as a 5th segment to sit in the center. The idea worked conceptually, but I quickly became concerned about practicality. To be stable, the table segments would need to be thick and made of sturdy wood, which would mean it's quite heavy. And combined with the screen and its casing, the total weight could easily reach 70 to 90 kilograms, making portability a serious issue. Therefore, due to cost and weight constraints, I decided to abandon the collapsible table segments and focus solely on the digital gaming screen. In the original concept, cables would have run beneath the table segments, which would have added complexity and potential setup issues. Instead, I shifted to designing a central console that houses the screen. This console would serve as the core of the setup with the option to add collapsible table segments around it later. The console would include atmospheric LED lighting. Then the screen itself, of course, with its integrated speakers and proper ventilation for sound output. It would also feature an HDMI input, power outlets, and USB and USB-C ports for charging laptops and phones during play. Let's go grab a very important part for our project. The screen. I found a rather cheap OLED or OLED screen. I hope it fits. Which was approximately 90 minutes from where I live. The screen cost me 120 euros, which was a bargain. It has slight damages with the colors in the center of the screen and some defect pixels around the corners. But other than that, it was working like a charm. Next thing on the list was the wood. I had the wood pre-cut, and I also bought the wood stain as well as the varnish. And the rest was just waiting for lots and lots of Amazon packages. I don't have that much space to work on bigger projects. Usually during summer, I build everything big outside. But it's winter in Austria, and outside wasn't an option. So you'll see me squeezing around and using the space I have available. I did a lot of taking notes and calculating at the start, because honestly I just didn't want to mess up my build. I would need to get new wood, and that would cost money, which I don't have that much, or don't want to waste on failed attempts. An amazing tool for the works I did was the carpenter square, and I always use it together with the double meter stick. The plate you see me having here and prepare here was one I already had at home from a previous project, and I'm currently measuring to cut off strips of wood off of it. Those wooden strips will later be used for the upper framework. I cut 2 for each side, naturally, and did 1 spare. And this one spare comes in really, really handy later on. I'm using the big buzzsaw to cut the angles for the corner connections. Here comes a classic example of not much space to work with. On this step, I was measuring the drill holes for the corner connections. I make them small for the start, because the screws I'm going to put in will be much thinner than the ones on the final assembly. The only task will be to hold the frame together while I'm working on it. So with those corner connectors, I make sure that everything's properly aligned and doesn't move when I screw it together. I also already had those corner connectors from a previous project. Now I was just remeasuring the frame, put it around the TV to see if it fits, and I had enough space around to work with, so it was a success. Here, another example of working in tight space. And I did tons and tons of dancing and singing. I would have probably cut a third of the time it took me to build this thing if I wouldn't have danced so much. But it made working with it a lot more fun, and also made the cutting of the video a lot more fun, to be honest. Here I noticed that my carpenter square was bent, not in a way that it would affect the 90-degree angle, but it was just a bit annoying to work with it like that. So here I'm cutting the back plate to the correct size. This is the face of a man who has silly ideas. So I'm using 19mm lumber core plywood, and it was much harder than expected. The old woodworking router operates at a very high rotational speed. It's far faster than most other tools. So on the low hand, we're looking at around 8,000 rounds per minute. On the high end, it's 24,000 to 30,000. Thus, I wouldn't recommend you to dance while holding one of those while it's running. And I'm using it to make the edges round. It also produces a lot of wood dust. I will also be grinding by hand later on for edges where the roundness doesn't have to be that big. But I wanted to make the inside edge of the back plate quite round to make it easier to slip into the frame. And the result it produces is, for me, always very satisfying. So that was the first time I put the back plate into the frame. Worked like a charm. Good. Okay. Next up, I need some holes to be able to pull it out. I will do 2 on each side, because like this I can't reach it unless I touch from this side, and this side will be, the other side will be closed up with the TV, with the screen. And here we see the first time of me putting all the wooden parts at their respective spots. And more dancing. So next up was a lot of grinding by hand. I use a rougher grinding paper first, and then go to a finer one. Marking the parts to be able to put them back in the correct order again later on. Don't ask me what's happening here. Now I'm marking the spots where the holes are going to be drilled in for me to be able to pull the back plate out again if needed. I do 2 on each side. And I had to measure where to put them to make sure that they don't interfere with any of the other stuff I'm putting in later on. I'm not drilling all the way down at first, because it might cause the wood to tear and rip at the bottom side. So I'm just drilling 3/4 or 2/3 into the wood, and then I'll take a scrap piece of wood, put it below, and finish the drill. So the jigsaw is the next tool that comes in action. I use it to finish the holes. I found it very funny to notice that I harumphed or cuffed exactly in the rhythm of the song. So I'll use the hand router for one side of the holes, and I'm grinding the other side. Here I'm taking the measurement for the hand routing tool again to make sure I have the same angle on the holes. And again, it produces a lot of wooden dust. Cleaning my glasses to be able to see again. I was confused, to be honest, that the picture wasn't distorted, because when I give other people my glasses, they can't see that well. So, again, a hand router is a quite dangerous tool to be working with. And the way I'm using it here is not the proper way to use it. This is the point where the big oopsie happened, because I forgot to put the fence on the hand router. So it was just eating into the wood. I was sitting there and thinking about my stupidity and what I do next. And that's when I remembered that I made a 5th strip of wood, and I'll just be using that. So I get the big buzzsaw out again, cut the angles, and get back to work. This time with using the fence. On the drilling tip of a hand router is usually this metal part which stops the drill to dig into the wood too far. But my wooden strips were too thin, so they were not stopped. Luckily I have this fence which I can attach to the hand router, and we're ready to continue. To make the inside of the frame look good, I'm not starting all the way at the end, but I have to move a bit further in. And lots of wooden dust. You should really work with a mask. Done. So the next step for me was the branding. I was thinking about what to write on the frame, and finally decided to put nihil verum omnia licita on the frame, which is a saying from Assassin's Creed, which means nothing is true, everything is permitted. And I found it quite fitting for pen paper scenario actually, but didn't just want to write it normally, so I used the Futhark rune alphabet and wrote it in runes. Together with some ornaments, I printed the stuff out and used the pencil to press it into the wood by redrawing it. That way I can see the imprinted lines I made and use the branding tool to perpetuate them. Then the second part of woodworking starts. I think from the working part alone we are on day 3 there, minus getting all the materials. So in total I think I worked about 5 to 6 days on it so far. This is the first time of me putting it together with every part roughly cut to its final length and with all the angles. And the frames with the brandings on will also not change until they're being colored. So, some of the parts I still needed arrived today, and I'm now going to cut the holes to put them in. Let's go! While working, I got a package. It was honestly the perfect timing, and this happened more than once for the items arriving at the time I needed them. So lots of marking stuff, measuring the outlets. So here's where I'm thinking about where to put the HDMI port. With this yellow drill you're seeing here, it's a 35mm hole drill. I'm putting the holes for the ventilation and sound. I'll have grids in that size, which I'm going to put in close to the end of the project. So here I'm taking all the measurements I have to drill holes for and do cutouts. I took measurements of the screen again to mark how far it goes, because I really want to prevent things colliding and having to find a way working around a mistake I made. At this point, I noticed that the shells I wanted to put into the wood didn't work as expected. They were a size 10, so I thought that my 10mm drill would do the job, but they were falling through. I didn't have a 9mm drill, and it would later turn out that a 9mm drill wouldn't have fit either. I needed a 9.5, but I knew I could work around that for now, so I just drilled smaller holes and I would just make them larger. So, more dancing. The HDMI port, due to it being rectangular, took me roughly 20 minutes of filing, rasping, honing it down, until it finally fit. I wanted it to be a very tight fit, so that I could just stick it in there and it would hold by itself. Now I'm drilling the holes on the corners bigger for the final screws. There's one spot where an outlet collides with the screw, so I had to cut the screw. I again used a somewhat unorthodox method to do so. I would not recommend you doing it like that, but it worked out for me. I drilled the screw I had to cut into some scrap wood and used a metal saw blade on the jigsaw to cut through it. At this point I got a 9.5mm drill and put in the big holes for the shells. I'm using fine threaded screws to pin the backboard in place. I put in a total of 10 shells, and once the backplate is put in place, it also benefits the whole structure. It'll give it strength and make sure it's sturdy. Now that all the drilling and cutting and grinding is done, it's time to color the wood, to stain it. Again, working on tight space. I'm in my boiler room because it's warm and dry here, so the stain will dry faster, same with the varnish. It always looks really messy, but you won't see all those lines I drew, or where the drops of the stain ran down. I didn't record me putting on the varnish, but it's the same process. So I always put the stain onto some paint roller, and I do the same with the varnish. I only put on one layer of varnish because I'm storing the final work at a dry place, and I wanted to keep the wooden texture as much as possible. And too much varnish always makes it feel like it's plasticky. So first I had to clean up all the mess from the packages I got, and then it was time to lay it all out and screw it together. Yeah, now it's time for the assembly. I was really looking forward to do that. It's the most fun part in my opinion. It can also be the most nerve-wracking part, because that's the time when I see if all my measurements were correct and if everything fits together. I put in the shells. I put some protective caps on the hex bolts. They were round and I thought I might like the look. I sat there for a while and decided if I actually like the look, but I thought I have them and I don't dislike it particularly, so yeah. It'll also lift the whole box a bit off the ground when it's standing. So here I'm marking the spots for the drill holes to put the outer frame on. Then some handles to be able to carry the whole thing. At this time, the whole thing was roughly weighing 12 kilograms, so it's not too heavy. And once all the outlets and the TV will be put in, It should weigh up to around 35 kilograms. I used a 3mm acrylic plate, but the place where I ordered it from got the measurements wrong. It was 1mm too wide and 3mm too long. I would have been able to press it in, but I wanted to have some space between the walls to prevent tension and the acrylic plate breaking. Therefore, I grinded it by hand for about 2 hours. I'm using some foam rubber to put between the wood and the acrylic plate. So I didn't want to have the screen bare at the front because I'm planning to put miniatures on it, because it will be a digital pen and paper gaming field. So people should be able to roll a dice on it and yeah, put their characters, their miniatures on it. The acrylic plate had lots of fingerprints on it, from myself, of course. I used water to clean it and then went over it with a polishing cloth. And I think you really can spot the difference at just how clear it is after going over it with the polishing cloth. Look at that shine. This was the most nerve-wracking part, because I knew if I effed up here, I would need a new screen, and that might have endangered the whole project. I manufactured the frame in such a way that most 55-inch TVs would fit, but I really didn't want to have to deal with that. So I went on to put sponge around the TV to act as cushion and to put it in place from the sides to prevent it of shifting around. To set the TV in place, I put those angle irons all around. I am not sure if I put too many. That's when I'm putting in the outlets, which was quite satisfying to do. And the power cable, I used some foam sponge to cover up the hole. I glued it in place. And again, perfect timing. That's when I received the package. It was the air ventilation covers. I wired everything together and put the LED stripes inside, feeling like working on some sci-fi futuristic thing. closing the lid, and then it was done. Working on this was tiresome. I don't particularly enjoy the work, but I always love the product. It's never that perfect, especially if I do something for myself, because I think slight imperfections add to the charm. And let's be honest, it's not going to stay in perfect condition forever. But I really loved how it turned out. And I'm now looking forward to test this thing in action on the next pen and paper session. Thanks for watching. See you next time.